Hi everyone, can I have your attention please? Hello. Hi everybody. So we wanted to formally welcome you to the Penn Anthropology Colloquium for 2019 and 2020 with the wonderful theme food. We've had a couple of talks so far, but this talk really represents the first talk in the actual Colloquium series, and so by way of introduction, we're going to remind you of what the idea behind this year's series is.
So I wanted to just read the abstract again. I know we've sent this around, so a lot of people have read it. But this kind of gave rise to the speakers that Morgan and I chose for this colloquium. So next to breathing, eating is perhaps the most essential of all human activities and one with which much of social life is entwined. This is a quote from an article that we had the students read in the first couple weeks of this class. So food surrounds us, simultaneously representing a universal human necessity and a key medium through which individual and cultural variation is expressed. From an evolutionary standpoint, food sharing and the practice of group provisioning may represent a large part of how humans came to be. Likewise, modifications of food production systems represent some of the most critical moments across our history. Consumption has been and is likely always will be a foundational component of society and culture. Anthropologists have examined global political economy through studies of sugar, milk, sushi, and countless other examples. What is more, with the looming threat of climate change and our deeply interdependent global food system, the study of food and food production is more pressing than ever.
So the 2019-2020 speaker series is really intended to encourage inter-subfield conversation that examines the production, distribution, and consumption of food across time and space. We ask how food creates meaning and how it is deployed as a symbol within and between communities. We seek to take a generous view of food and explore those substances that sustain human culture, health, and life through nourishment, medicine, memory, ritual, identity, and more. We invite speakers to join the Penn Anthropology community in exploring, thinking, and practicing four-field anthropology through the study of food writ large. So welcome, we're really excited to get the series kicked off today, and I'm going to invite Alex Chen to come up and introduce our speaker.
So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Rozin, who is Professor of Psychology here at the University of Pennsylvania. Among his numerous honors accomplishments, Professor Rozin is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, Society for Experimental Psychologists, as well as past editor of the journal Appetite. Professor Rozin received a joint PhD in biology and psychology from Harvard University. His initial work focused on food selection in animals, the acquisition of reading skills, and the neuropsychology of amnesia. Since then, his research interest has steadily moved from a biological emphasis to a cultural approach. A major focus of his research in the past 25 years has been on human food choice, where he examined everything from the psychological significance of food flavorings in different societies to the cultural evolution of cuisine. He has worked in France, Japan, India, as well as the United States, with a recent interest in the emotion of disgust. His talk today is entitled Human Food Choice, Cultural, Biological, Psychological, and Historical Perspectives. Please join me in welcoming Professor Rozin.
You can ask me questions if you want during the talk. Like, how do I advance this? Is this the way?
You can either click it or you can press the arrow button.
Okay. Press there, that's right. Okay, I just want to start saying a couple of general things. I'm a cultural psychologist. You may not know that there is such a thing, but there is. It's a growing area of psychology. Psychologists have realized, after over 100 years of work, that Americans are less than 5% of the world. And basically, we were studying Americans, African-American college students who are about 0.2% of the world. And so this is part of a realization that there's a lot of stuff out there. And so psychologists have been interested primarily in understanding human universals, what was true of all humans. The question was, would a Penn sophomore be an exemplar of the mind of the world? And nobody worried too much about that. Okay, so let's see if I... Okay, so this field was sort of originated by Richard Schrader. How many of you know Richard Schrader is? Okay, so Richard Wade is a professor of anthropology at the University of Chicago, and he was the person who sort of put together this. He's trained as an anthropologist, a student of John Whiting, and he really mobilized people to be interested in this, mobilized psychologists, as much as anthropologists. So let's see now, where's my button here? Okay. And I was originally doing animal research, and it was Rick who really set me on this course that I'm in now. And I spent 2 years at the Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences, which is basically social science think tank, just off the Stanford campus. And the first time I went, Rick was a member, just happened to be the other 40 people. And the second time I went, he had organized a group on culture and mind of 6 people to spend a year just talking about this and developing ideas. And here's the group of us. So that's Rick Schwader. This is Jutta Heckhausen, who's a developmental psychologist. That's Bill Durham, who's an anthropologist, a biological anthropologist at Stanford. That's me. This is Shinobu Kitayama and Hazel Marcus, who are 2 of the pioneers. They're psychologists in cultural psych, working primarily comparing the Japanese as it were mind, to the American mind. Psychologists are very interested in minds, as opposed to behavior, believe it or not, even though we went through behaviors. So most of the cultural stuff is about how people think in different cultures, and there's relatively little attention to what they do. Whereas I think ethnographers are particularly interested in what people do and so on. So that makes me a little bit different, not only from psychologists in general, but also from cultural psychologists. Okay, so I've tried for about 30, 40 years to build cultural psychology at Penn, and I failed. I'm retired now. I'm not trying anymore, though I'm still very active. 30 years is enough. We founded the Solomon Asch Center for the Study of Ethno-Political Conflict, which existed for about 10, 15 years, and that was a very multi-social science. All the social sciences were involved in that, but it started within psychology, and that did quite well, but for complicated political reasons, which I won't bother you with, it had to close. So that was one attempt to bring psychology a little more into the social sciences. Psychology likes to think of itself as a natural science. Natural sciences are more prestigious in general, and they get more money, and psychology has fought for decades to be lumped with the natural sciences and not with the social sciences. It succeeded, but as it succeeded, I was moving toward the social sciences, but I started out as very much a natural scientist. Okay, so we've tried that. John Lucy was here in this department, and he studies language and worked in Mayan areas in Yucatan. He was a student of Rick Schwader. So you had a person who was a cultural psychologist here, but he left the University of Chicago. We've hired 4 people in my department who are cultural psychologists. Alan Fisk, who's an ethnographer. Alan Fisk is he's a student of Schwader too. Stephen Heine, who's a psychologist, but he knows Japan the way an ethnographer would know it. Totally fluent and lived there a long time. Francisco Gilroy, who's a student, who's also a graduate of UCLA Anthropology. And we now have on our faculty Corinna Arcella, who's trained as a biological anthropologist, and just got tenure, which is very nice. And so we've been poking around in anthropology. I don't think we've been poking around in psychology, but we have been poking around in anthropology. Anyway, it would be nice to have some more interaction. Okay, with that, let me start with just mentioning that our disciplines are very different, and that's a plus. We are very data-oriented, very number-oriented. As soon as we get into any environment, we start counting. Even if we don't know what we're counting, that's one of our problems. But we're very good at data analysis, we're very good at doing experiments, and we don't know much about observation. We don't even value it. And observation, of course, has to precede experiment. So you are much more focused on observation and context, putting things in their context, and psychologists like to pull them out of their context and beat the hell out of them. And we both have virtues, and it's worth combining, and I try to combine some of those 2 things in my work. I value observation. Okay, let's figure start with, well, this is a picture of eating. This is the mouth's eye view of eating. So that's the mouth, and a piece of cucumber is coming into the mouth. Now, people really care about what goes in their mouth. This is the psychology of eating. It's not just like touching your forehead. You know, it's going into you. And so people have some of their greatest pleasures and some of their greatest negative things come from things that might go in their mouth. I'll just give you an example of this. I hesitate to do this while you're reading, so never mind. I won't give you this example. Never mind. Okay. So there's the framework that I come from, coming out of biology, is that we are generalist omnivores. One of our great strengths is that we can eat almost anything. And as Ernst Mayr has pointed out, an omnivore is an open system. That is to say, we can't pre-specify genetically what's edible and what's not, because anything is potentially edible, and we have to go through some discovery process. We have a few guidelines, but very few. And so that the emphasis is on acquisition, either acquisition, personal acquisition or cultural acquisition. We've got to learn what out there can be put in your mouth and what not. I think some of the newer people who are promoting sustainability, which I strongly favor, sort of think that the natural world is great and everything's fine in there. And that's not true. Most of these poisons known are natural. And so it's really a problem to be an omnivore because you can really get in trouble just chewing on any leaf you run into. Okay. We're not the only generalists. There are quite a few of them. And three of them I want to remind you of. Humans, rats, and cockroaches. And humans, rats, and cockroaches can be found all over the world. They can always make it because they can always find something there to eat. And that's, of course, one of our great strengths. Okay, now, we have three abilities that are part of our biology, which help us to negotiate. This is an incredible problem. There's all this stuff out there, and you've got to get food to eat. You have very little information about what's edible. This is perhaps the greatest problem humans face as they go outside of culture, which, of course, tells them a lot of these things. What out there can I eat? You can get in a lot of trouble. And you not only have to eat things that aren't toxic, but you have to eat proper combinations to get all the nutrients you need. Okay, so we have a mechanism of learning about if you get sick or feel better, even hours after you eat something, you can learn to either avoid or, they said, that's a very special learning. It's only about food. It's only about things that come in the mouth. Then we have a very, as you would expect for an omnivore, we're interested in new foods because new foods are potential additions to your repertoire, but we're also cautious about them because they could be toxic. So we have this complex interplay of what we call neophilia, liking new, and neophobia, disliking new. And every individual that's been studied, and this is in the Western world, other people haven't been studying this, has sort of an interplay of fear of new, but interest in new, and sort of, it's a dynamic. And the third thing we have biologically is innate taste biases. This is not just tasting, it's oral biases is the real word. We have an innate present at birth desire for sweet tastes, related evolutionarily to the fact that food is sweet, and we have almost certainly, though it's never been shown in newborn infants, a innate preference for fatty textures, and of course that describes milk, right? Fatty and sweet. And we have an innate aversion present at birth and demonstrated for bitter, and almost certainly, though it's never been shown in newborn infants, an aversion to irritants like pepper that produces a burn in the mouth. That's basically what we're coming in with, and we got to make sense of this whole world. Okay. Now, the way I'm going to talk about this, and relates to both what you do in anthropology and also there's a new field in psychology, another one called evolutionary psychology. Psychologists also discovered evolution. They discovered evolution in culture about 20, 30 years ago. And it's been good because we're good at doing studies, and so we started studying those things. So I just want to give you this time frame because it's what I use. So here's you are now. We can talk about what caused this behavior right now, immediate cause. We can say, what's the consequence of that behavior? We can say, how did that behavior get in your repertoire? We call that develop. This is my scheme. developmental psychology. This is not part of psychology. Anything that happens from birth to now is called developmental. How did it get into your repertoire? If it goes further, before your birth, we get into evolutionary explanation, and if we talk about consequences other than the immediate consequences, like long-term consequences, survival, we're talking about adaptive habit, okay? And I'm going to go into those things. Okay, so let's start with the most important term, which I could give a whole lecture on this, and I'm not going to even say that much about it, but a major phenomenon in biological evolution and an enormous phenomenon in cultural evolution is pre-adaptation. According to Ernst Mayr, who's the great evolutionary biologist of the 20th century, pre-adaptation is probably responsible for more evolutionary novelties than the normal story of the mutations. It's recombination. It's basically using something you already have for something else, or combining things you already have. A typewriter and a calculator to make a computer, and so on. It's absolutely powerfully important in cultural evolution, because in biological evolution, you have to wait for the opportunity to combine two things in terms of their proximity physically or genetically. Whereas in culture, we can say, I've got this, I've got that, let's put them together. Okay? So, I just said that, okay. And just to give you a quick example, food, we have a vocabulary for food, right? And we use that vocabulary metaphorically for other things. I say, you're a sweet person. I can't stomach your argument. Let's get to the meat of the paper. These are all, we're borrowing food words. This is what metaphor is about, right? So that's a form of pre-adaptation. We take something that's already in our repertoire, but we use it for something else, okay? So if we look at food, food starts out as nutrition, and it's something to pleasure really, but it has all of these other functions. It's used as a social means of sharing, of bonding with other people. It's used as a way of making you feel who you are, what group you belong to. It becomes an aesthetic thing when you go out and spend more than $10 for dinner, you're not buying nutrition, you're buying an experience. And if I had more time, I'd show you the ultimate of that, which is El Bulli, but I don't have time for that. It becomes a moral substance. It actually has some implications for what is right and what is good. It connects you to deities and just to the world at large, and it becomes a health vehicle more than just giving you enough nutrition, but making you feel like you're flourishing within the domain of health. We'll talk about some of this. And we have developed something called the Meaning of Food in Life Scale, which is done with Naomi Arbor. It was her PhD thesis. I directed it, but it was at Columbia Nutrition Department. And Matthew Ruby, who you'll hear about by the postdoc and myself. So this is a scale that measures six meanings of food. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, those 6. And we have it, we're now using it cross-culturally. And of course, it's possible to have a very narrow focus of food, and it doesn't mean a whole lot, or it's possible to have it interwoven in all of your life. That depends on individual, and it depends on the culture, of course. Okay, so if we're going to explain eating, which I want to talk a little about today, what do we mean? I just want to say we mean a few things. It means what we eat. What do we eat? Okay, and that includes how we deal with the food, not just listing the foods. How we prepare them, and so on. Then there's how much we eat. Psychologists are much more interested in this than that. I think this is a whole lot more interesting than that one, but psychologists are deeply invested in how much we eat because they have a homeostatic model for, keeping your energy level constant. It doesn't work very well that way. And they're very interested in obesity, of course, which is mostly how much we eat. And then there's another thing that nobody in psychology studies, is how we eat. And that's, of course, would be the focus in anthropology. But psychologists in general are not interested in, we call them the domains of life. Eating, sex, entertainment, other things. They're more interested in general processes like memory, perception, language, which of course interface with those things, but it's a different focus. So there's almost nothing in the psychology introductory text on what people eat. Average one page out of 650. Okay. And the context of eating, again, is especially important for how we eat and what we eat, and the meaning of the food, what food represents for people other than nutrition. These are all things that one has to consider as one studies food. I try to do a little of each, but I don't do much on how much we eat either. But this focus has brought together some people from the University of Constance in Germany, who are mostly health psychologists, and myself and French sociologist Claude Fischler, to see if we could get some sense of how food functions across the world. And we have developed, we have a team that's doing this. And the focus of it is right now on the transition from traditional diets to more modern diets. And even this is a complicated thing because in the nutrition field they talk about modern food. And what they mean is Coca-Cola and Oreos and McDonald's hamburgers. But they don't recognize that much of modern food is ethnic food of some other culture that's come, like pizza, like tacos. That's not like Coca-Cola. They lump it all into one pile, which is, I think, the mistake. And we're trying to separate those things. Okay, so we are measuring the food, the different motives people have for eating, the meanings of food with that scale I just mentioned, and this transition. It's a joint university. Gudrun Sprosa, who is a health psychologist at Constance, is the person who's organized this and gotten the grant from the German Science Foundation, something I could never do. And we have 10 countries involved, which together make up more than 50% of the population of the world. And here they are: United States, Mexico, Brazil, Ghana, France, Germany, Turkey, India, China, and Japan. For each country we have a local academic who's either an anthropologist, a psychologist, or a nutritionist, who is our consultant that helps us to make sense in those cultures. This is all being done by questionnaire, but in some cases interview, rather than online, because of course in some countries like China and India, a good part of the population is not online, and we want those people in this because they're going to be much less personalized and they're going to be more authentic. So, there's a lot of problems with this kind of research, but at least we're trying. And this is the conceptualization we've worked on. What we eat involves ingredients, processing, preparation, temporal origin, where it came to, when it came to your group, spatial origin, local or global, and the amount of variety. And how you eat has to do with temporal aspects like meal times, spatial aspects, you eat at home or out of home, social aspects, how you organize a meal, appreciation for food, how you think about food, and concerns about food, which are quite different in traditional cultures than modern American cultures. We're worried about living from 80 to 90, and they're worried about making it. Okay. So, welcome. Now, this is my little 1 minute on how we eat. This is, to me, the great book on how we eat. Leon Cass, The Hungry Soul. It's only about Europe. It's about how food has gone from being just grub, just something that you survive, to a high measure of civilization. With the way we eat has very little. In fact, if someone looked at the way we eat, they wouldn't even know what we were doing. Sitting around the table, talking about politics, all this sort of stuff, using these implements. I mean, nobody else does this. And as Cass points out, eating is the only biological function which has been so elaborated that it's almost unrecognizable from what animals do. When I teach my food course, the first class, everyone gets mushu vegetables, it's vegetarian, so I was happy with that, and we have to eat it in all the different ways that people eat it. So the first thing they have to do is stick their face in it and eat it, because that's the way animals do it. And then they use their fingers, and then they use the pancake, and then they use a spoon, and then chopsticks and a fork, and they sort of go through this sequence, and each of them has their virtues. Sticking your hand in, by the way, is great. You get an aroma that you just don't get. Okay, so Cass is an amazing guy. He's a sort of right-wing, but libertarian, and a little traditional otherwise. But he's a brilliant guy, writes terrifically. And he's an MD, he does work in biochemistry, and he also teaches Old Testament at the University of Chicago. He's one of the few people who's a scholar, a humanist, and a scientist. And you can see that in his book. So what he's talking about is that eating has become a display of civilization, of that I'm not an animal, look what I'm doing with food. And here's just one of his lovely quotes, well, two of them actually. An activity that is inherently ugly is beautified by graceful deed and tactful speech. An activity that is violent and destructive, killing life, right, is tamed by gentle manner that keeps its destructive character mostly out of sight. An activity that deforms and dissolves living forms is given formality of its own by the work of the human intellect. Or my favorite quote, we eat as if we don't have to. We exploit an animal necessity as a ballerina exploits gravity. Okay, so that's the end of that section, but I just felt I had to say something there. Okay, now the big event, there are a number of great food events in history, cooking, agriculture. This is one of them, the Columbian Exchange. It's named for Columbus, but actually it could be named for a lot of people. And it's the exchange of foods that occurred when the Western and Eastern Hemisphere started communicating because of the early explorers in the 15th, 16th century. And these are all, and most of the focus from good reason has gone on what went to the old, I shouldn't say old world, that's a terrible word, the Eastern Hemisphere. Chili, these are some of the foods: chili peppers, chocolate, corn, manioc, peanuts, potatoes, squash, tomatoes, vanilla. There's more. But just think of the world's food. Think of the Mediterranean food. Minus all that. By the way, this includes sweet peppers. Sweet peppers were derived from chili peppers in Europe. Okay, so I want to talk about a few of these things in respect to the time axis I gave you. So let's start with sugar. Now, sugar did not come from the New World, but sugar cane, which is the best source of sugar, was not growable in Europe because you need a tropical climate. Europe doesn't have it. So the big influx of sugar, they had sugar beets, but the big influx came after sugar cane was available through the colonization of the Americas. That was one of the motives for colonizing the Americans. So we start with innate sweet peppers. We search for sweet foods. We like find them, and we cultivate the sweet foods. We can't grow the best source of sweetness, so we colonize some places that do it. Then we extract the sugar, so we have the stuff itself, and it becomes cheap, and that has a big effect on European life. That sugar is not a delicacy anymore. And then we got to a situation we have now where sweet is, the calories are not so good anymore, we have too much of them, and some people think sugar is a toxin, which is a crazy idea, since your blood is, you basically live on sugar. Glucose is the energy source of the body, main first energy source. And so we develop non-carb. This whole drive for sweet taste leads to the development of aspartame and all these other sweeteners, saccharin. So you can see how a little piece of our biology has an enormous impact on cultural development. Let's take one more example. Chocolate. Chocolate tastes terrible if you just take it right out of it. It's bitter, it doesn't have any texture where it isn't that aromatic. And through an elaborate, it comes from Mexico, in that bitter form by the Mexicans. But it got to Europe, a whole bunch of technology was developed. Milk, sugar, conching, which makes the fat have the softness that you know. And we created basically a delicious bomb. It's a calorie bomb. It's got fat and sugar, it smells great, and it melts in your mouth. It's the only common fat that melts in your mouth. That experience, the only other time you get that is with ice cream. And ice cream, of course, is cold. Chocolate does it all by itself. Okay, so here we have our desire for fat and sugar, which is biological, leads to all this development. Okay? Now, let me just give you a couple. Manioc, you're not as familiar with, it's also called cassava. There are two versions of manioc. It comes from Brazil primarily, or that region. There's no argument of exactly where it starts. We have an archaeologist here to tell you. But it's a staple in Brazil, parts of Brazil. And there's two forms of it, one of which is bitter, which is quite a desirable crop. For one thing, is it's easy to grow, and doesn't have too many predator animals that eat it, because not only because it's bitter, but because it's toxic. But So it's a resistant crop. And the tradition in the country, in Brazil and other areas around there, was to rinse it. It contains cyanide at levels high enough to kill. And the cyanide is going to form, that's water soluble. So if you crush it and rinse it enough, you'll get rid of the cyanide, and then it's a great starch staple. It's not a great start for a staple, but you know, that tradition was that when it went over to the Eastern Hemisphere, primarily it was adopted in Africa, that tradition went with it, the washing it out, the rinsing. So it was, the whole thing went as a package, and we don't know how people discovered this. And so one can say manioc has many virtues, because it's a resistant crop, it's calories, but that might explain its adaptive value. But how did it actually get there? How did the people in Brazil figure this out? We don't know, but you can imagine it. I mean, for example, there's one view that they used it to kill fish. They would grind it up and throw it in the water, and it would kill fish, and then they could get the fish out. And then, so they already had a washing, maybe, of it, or they maybe had another tradition where they washed something. We don't really know how it happened, but it's easy to imagine discovering that this stuff was okay. Now, okay. Now I want to talk about corn. We have an expert on corn here. Now, corn's a different story. Corn is not toxic as it grows. It's a good source of calories. It may be the major source of calories in the world now. If not, it's close. It's the most efficient per square unit of land. You can get more calories out of corn than any of the other grains, and it's relatively easy to grow. It's a major animal food, and in fact, in Europe, it's primarily an animal food. It comes again from Mexico and other parts of the Americas, and it's probably the major animal food, I suspect, in Europe. Europeans don't eat much corn. Occasionally in Hungary and some places, but it's not a major part of the diet. So they use it for animal food. Now, the special thing about corn is the way it's prepared in Mexico. And of course, Cortez observed this. And the form is, as you probably know, tortilla. I don't know how many of you have ever had a really good, fresh tortilla, but it is absolutely wonderful. So the Mexicans would mostly store the kernels because this corn comes seasonally, and they have all these kernels. They store it dry. They boil it in water with calcium hydroxide, which is they get from seashell residues, which are available. I'm not sure why they're available 6,000 feet up in the air, but they are. Okay. And then they roll it out they grind it out into a pancake, a little round thing, that's the tortilla, you know, and then they heat it on an iron griddle. So I went to Mexico in the 1970s. I went there to study chili pepper, not to study corn, which I'll tell you in a minute. But while I was there, I got interested in corn too. That's their staple. Almost all of the calories come from corn. And the problem is, so I found Henry Selby, who was an anthropologist at the time at the Temple. I just looked around. He was working in a village in the highlands of Mexico. I asked him if I could add a little bit of a grant. And I said, could I work in your village, and could you come down with me for a few days and introduce me to the people you work with? And he said, sure, and he did. And then I was welcomed there, and I spent a month studying things. Okay, but here's what was interesting. This is a picture just of patting out a tortilla in the village. Now, this tortilla technology is very nutritionally valuable. This is work, I'll tell you, that came out of this department, your department. It's a source of calcium, the cal, which is in short supply in Mexico. It frees niacin, one of the B vitamins, which is, again, needed in Mexico. I mean, it's not so high in their food, which is bound and not usable until you boil the corn in alkali. That's the calcium hydroxide. And there's one amino acid in short supply in the Mexican diet of corn and beans, and that's bound in the corn, not accessible, but the boiling and in alkali releases it. So it's a really good thing to do. And so what evolutionary people do, including Katz, Valeroy, and Hediger and Valeroy here, was they did a beautiful paper showing that this is this is the case, and that's looking at tortilla technology all over the Central America. They assume they've accounted for it. But here, look, the Mexicans do this, and it's great for nutrition. That's great. But how did they discover this? None of these things are easy to figure out. It's not like you eat corn and you get better. It's a longer-term nutritional improvement. How do people think about that? And I think, so that's the proximal case. That's not just what good is it, the adaptive side of evolution, but how did it happen? I'm interested in the psychology. How did people discover these things? So in this particular case, I was in the village anyway. So I asked the people, the women and the men in the village, by the way, this was all done in bad Spanish. Their natural languages, native language is Zapotec, and they required Spanish as a secondary language. And my Spanish is not very good, so that was great. Neither of us used the subjunctive, it was easy to talk. So anyway, I said to the people in the village, why do you do that? Why don't you just grind the corn? And of course the men had no idea. The men don't know how to make tortillas. So the women said, I don't know, we just do it that way. That's what most people in the world, if you ask them, why do you do this? The answer is, we've always done it, which is the right answer. But Americans think that's not a good answer. You have to say it's nutritious, we got to have niacin and all that. But people basically explain most of what they do because we're always doing it. That's why we do things. Anyway, so I asked them, one or two of them suggested, I think it's easy to roll out a tortilla if you do this. And that's a proximal thing that you could appreciate, right? So I said, would you mind making some tortillas without boiling? Just take the corn, grind it, and make the thing. They said, sure. So they made them. And this over here is a tortilla made without cal. This is with cal. And you can see there's much more corn in this one. That is, it softens up the corn. So that's a proximal reason. Here's another example. This is, but I don't know why this. The one on the right is the one made without cal. I don't know why it's a darker color. I just noticed it. But anyway, it's quite clear we did it a bunch of times that this softens the corn. So now the question is, what's the relation between the proximal advantage that it softens the corn and the nutritional advantage which is long-term? I don't know the answer to that, but I'm pretty sure they discovered it because it was easier to roll out a tortilla. Okay, now, little kids learn to make tortillas. Little girls learn how to make tortillas. Now, so the Mexicans have taken a really great source of calories, but not a full nutrient package. It isn't even, they eat it with beans, they get complementary amino acids. But corn is not a great nutritional source by itself, or almost by itself. So they make it a much better food by this traditional procedure. Now, that technology was not transferred to Europe, unlike manioc. They didn't come with how to make tortillas. They ate tortillas, I'm sure. Why didn't they come back? Because they didn't have a woman in Cortez's group. So none of them learned how to make a tortilla. None of the Mexican men know how to make a tortilla. So this peculiar accident of not having a woman on Cortez's team then resulted probably that corn was not adopted as a human food in Europe because it doesn't taste nearly as good as it does in a tortilla. So, and it isn't as nutritious. So that's a sort of an interesting historical sidelight, but little things can matter. Okay, now we're going to take another example of another Mexican food, and this is very different because corn tastes pretty good, and manioc is, it's pretty bland, but it doesn't taste bad. But chili pepper tastes bad. It burns your mouth, and people who have never had it don't like it. This was eaten by the Mexicans. It was eaten, by the way, often with chocolate. It was bitter and burning. And the chili peppers were brought back to Europe. And I would have said, if I was up watching them unload and tasting the things from the boats in Spain, I would have said, this one's a loser. Right? I mean, it tastes terribly. It tastes once and out. Look what happened. At least 2 billion people eat it every day and love it. How many of you love chili pepper in here? Okay, if we were, that's quite a few, but if we were in Mexico or Indonesia or Korea or southern China, everyone would raise their hand. Okay, so this was of interest to me. That's why I went to Mexico. Why would something with such a bad start, we have trouble getting people to adopt food, how can this one, which is so terrible to start with, ever be adopted? And it's widely adopted. It's the main flavoring in West Africa foods, in South Asia, India, one of the main flavorings. It's Southeast Asia, of course, in the Central and South America. Okay. So, people, and what's clear is that people like the bird. It's not that they say, this stuff tastes terrible, but it's good for me, so I can eat it. They love it. In fact, they don't like food without it. So, I say, so this is a peculiar case where something that is innately negative becomes positive. And that's what really interested me as a psychologist, and I won't talk about that much, because...
Well, why are you saying it's innately negative in the first place?
Because it is, because people, babies don't like it, kids don't like it, and people who first try it say, it's terrible, take it away, I don't want it again. It's a burn, it's an irritant signal from the mouth. We don't know why, by the way, there's an irritant receptor in the mouth, because it's not clear what is in the world that that's protecting us from. It's certainly not protecting us from chili pepper, which is actually quite nutritious. And not harmful, by the way. It seems that, okay. So, the Mexicans cultivated them. There are many, many different kinds of chili peppers developed by the Mexicans. I went into a whole thing about chili pepper variety. It's like wine, really. There's all these different peppers with different flavors, different aromas, different burns. I won't get into that now. It gets incorporated into their cuisine. It becomes a basic part of Mexican cuisine. And then it was exported to Europe. Okay, now, the question I want, so, what's going on? Well, this is from the Codex Mendoza, which is one of the early Spanish religious folk came over to make them more Catholics. Did some ethnography, and they made some pictures of it. And what's interesting about this picture, this is a child being punished by being held over a fire with chili peppers vaporizing. The interesting thing is these kids like the pepper in their mouth. No Mexican likes the pepper in their eye. So it's a very special thing. It's their mouth that likes it. And no one ever did a study to see if only one side of the mouth gets it, the other side like it too. I wanted to try that, but it's very hard to do that. But anyway, okay, so I went to this village. It's near Oaxaca, a mountain village, the kind of place where chili pepper was indigenously used. And one of the interesting things about it is, like in many places, the animals are running around all over the place. There's cows, I don't have it in this picture, but pigs and dogs are running around all over the place too. And that turns out to me, the most interesting thing I found. Okay, so this is every day, the woman of the house makes a salsa of tomatoes and usually chili pepper and some other greens, maybe some garlic, and that's put on all the food. Now, chili pepper is what we call a flavor principle. This is by departed wife Elizabeth Rozin's first cookbook, the flavor principle cookbook. She pointed out that each of the major non-northern cuisines in the world, not Northern Europe, has a characteristic flavoring that they put on virtually all their savory food, which she called the flavor principle. For China, it would be soy sauce, ginger root, and rice wine. And for Mexico, it's either tomato, garlic, and chili pepper, tomato, onion, chili pepper, or chili pepper and lime, depending on the food. But it's not virtually all their food. So it becomes, and that's how it's used around the world. Nobody eats tons of them. You use them as a flavoring to spice up your food, to make it more interesting. But it does burn your mouth. So, this is a typical lunch in the village I was at. These are 4 boys in a family, and they're eating their tortilla here with the beans, frijoles, and that's a bowl of hot sauce. And even in this family, even the 5-year-old is voluntarily dipping his tortilla into hot sauce and burning his mouth. He already likes it. That's about when it starts. So, I was very fortunate. Here's the psychologist part of me. There's a little store in the village. This is the only store. And they had this stuff they were selling, which are these little squares of, it cost virtually nothing. They're sugar and fruit, but there's one of them that's salt and hot pepper. They were 5 altogether. Everybody knew them. I could test for chili peppers. Someone made my stimuli for me. This was before the days of institutional review boards. So I could just say, hey, that's a good idea, let's do it. And within one day, I tested all the children in the village, because there was a little school and a lot of adults. It was my best day of data collection in my life. So I would just go around and I'd give them all five of these, I'd put them out and say, you can have one, whichever one you want, and I'd record their age and their gender. Boom. Okay, and here's the results of that. If they were choosing at random, they choose 20% hot ones, where there are 5 of them, only one of them has hot pepper, and you can see the little kids don't like it, and as soon as you get to 6 or 7, the kids are preferring it over the sugar sour water, which is really pretty tasty. So this, why it goes down is a long story, but the point was, they're preferring it, they like the burn by about 6. Okay, so I just want to tell you one other thing about this work, because I have other things on my agenda. I asked the people, do your animals like hot pepper? They said, are you crazy? Animals don't like hot pepper. Are you sure? I said, do you mind if I test the animals? No, go ahead. So we went around the village, and we either put this is one of the boys in the village, we fed the pigs or the dogs either tortillas, with or without hot sauce. We gave them both, and they eat them. They eat the garbage, so they eat Mexican food. But which one they ate first was what we were interested in. And we didn't find a single animal in the village who ate the hot one first. Not a single animal. We tested many, many animals. Here's a dog. Here we use Cheetos. The dogs will eat anything, you know. So this is one with hot sauce on. That's what we're about. The dog goes, sniffs them both, eats this one first. Okay? So we have this peculiar situation where everyone in the village over 5 loves this stuff, and the dogs and the pigs, which are eating the same food, none of them like it. I thought that was interesting. I couldn't publish this paper because they said, so what? I said, so what? This is the world's probably most consumed spice. Humans love it, and there's animals that have the same diet and they don't like it. Anyway, I eventually got it published. Okay. So, chili pepper spreads, it's probably the most consumed spice in the world if you don't count garlic as a spice. How did that happen? First of all, I don't know. But one possibility in some parts of Asia was that they were already using black pepper, which has a burn that's milder, but a similar burn. So they were already used to the burn. But that, of course, then you have to ask, why do they like black pepper? And black pepper is expensive, it's hard to grow. Chili pepper is easy to grow in the tropics, or semi-tropics, so they replaced black pepper largely. So that's one possibility. We don't know the answer to this question. Now, chili pepper has a lot of adaptive values, and the people who are evolutionary psychologists and nutritionists and anthropologists point to it. It has vitamins, it's cooling, it causes sweating, by the way, only on the face and the neck, and so that evaporates and cools you. It activates the parasympathetic system, gets more gastric secretion, salivation, lowers heart rate a little bit. All these things can be thought to be good. Do you think that's why people eat this stuff? Well, the people who look at adaptive values say, yeah, because look, it's good for them. I say, no, but how did they get to eat it? How did they, you have to eat it a bunch of times before you get to like it. What made them try it the second time? And what makes them try it now the second time is that all the people they admire, their family, they all eat it, and the little kid is in this environment where chili pepper is wonderful. Okay, but we still don't know what happens. In fact, we don't know how people get to like any food, or anything. We don't know how they get to like cars, we don't know how they get to music. This is a psychological problem that hasn't interested psychologists. But anyway, they do get to like it. And by the way, the Hungarians developed the pepper without the capsaicin and hot. So they developed the sweet pepper, which of course is much preferred in most of Europe, but the Mexicans don't particularly like sweet peppers. I mean, so they like it with the burn, but for those who don't like the burn, the Hungarians created a version, which I'm sure many of you like. Almost everybody likes sweet peppers. So we don't know how it happens. I'm not going to go through all this stuff. I just want to tell you one thing that's interesting, and that is an idea that I have about why people like chili peppers, which is a little different from the usual. And I call it benign masochism. People seem to like doing something which their body is telling them is not good, but they know it's okay. The existence of 110 million Mexicans is a good argument that chili pepper is okay, right? But your mouth is saying, get this out of here. Bad. And the fact that you know better it gives a certain sort of pleasure. It's like mind over matter. So let me give you some reason to think this is part of what's going on. I don't know if chili pepper is the first example of this or not. If you look at someone's liking for chili pepper, this is average over many people. This is getting hotter and hotter. You get little crackers, and how much do you like it? And when you try the next one, the next hot one. And so someone who likes chili pepper likes it more and more up to the top. And then the next one is, I don't want it anymore. It's too hot. The one they like best is the one just below the one they can't stand. So that's looking like they're pushing the envelope. Now, what does that remind you of? Roller coasters. People, not only do people like it, their heart is beating, their body is plunging to death, and they love it. And they like the scariest one they can get up, they can put up with. Same kind of thing. So that led me to the idea that, I don't know if it started with chili pepper, but this thing that may have started with chili pepper. There's a whole bunch of things like that. In food, there's all the irritant foods, horseradish, black pepper, ginger. There's the bitter foods. People get to like bitter. Bitter is innately negative. How many of you like bitter? You like black coffee, for example. That would be a good example. Okay. Dark chocolate has bitterness. Alcohol has bitterness. Burnt food has bitterness. But there's also ice. Most people in the world don't like iced drinks. They don't. In the village I was in, they never put the soda, and they had a little refrigerator just in that little. Actually, it was common. They didn't have electricity, but they had some way of cooling it. They got ice. But anyway, the people don't like that. Most people I know in India don't like ice things. But that's sort of a jar to the system. It's not something natural that they would normally eat. So people get to like that. Frightening or sad. A particularly interesting one is sad. Why do people like to become sad? They go to movies and they watch the movie and they sometimes cry in the movie and they pay money for this and they said they go and say it was a great movie. Now, see, it isn't really sad. That is, the person doesn't really die. And that sort of awareness that this is really something deeply upsetting, but it's not really upsetting, seems to be what's going on. And we also get this for pain. People get to like pain, like in massage or in fatigue. Okay, so I'm just going to stop there and say, that to me was the most interesting thing about all my work on chili pepper. It led me to stop worrying about all these other things. No animal, there's no record of any animal that likes any of this stuff. Oh, there are birds eat hot pepper, but they don't seem to get the signal in there. Right? But I mean, no animals will. Can you imagine taking a dog on a roller coaster? I mean, the dog would be terrified. Okay, so I now want to talk about a big change. I'm going to spend the rest of my talk on two major changes that have occurred in our food world in the lifetime of all of it in the lifetime of all. Some of it in the life. The second one in the lifetime of all of you. The first of it in the lifetime of many of you. This is the first thing that changed. The change in the world. We had the epidemiological revolution. Food used to be bad because you eat it, you get sick. You throw up. Now you eat it and you say, well, you keep doing this, and when you're 75, you'll be sorry. You're telling a 20-year-old this. Now, 20-year-olds don't think there's any life after 60 or 70 anyway. So that's not a good argument. People who are over 70 realize that they have a really good life. In fact, they're as happy as people in their 20s, believe it or not. But 20-year-olds are not going to be worried about something that's going to hit them in 50 years. If it's even true, which is questionable. Okay. We have a food surplus. This is all the developed world. That's only 20% of the world. I do a lot of my work in the developing world, but this is the developed world. We have a range of food choices. You can go to that supermarket on 40th and Walnut and get more different foods than any person in the world could get 100 years ago, no matter how wealthy. Enormous range of foods. We have superfoods like chocolate. We don't have to work anymore. It used to be getting food involving spending energy. There was this balance between energy expenditure and energy taken in. Now you just have to click on your computer if you want, you can get food. And we also, I won't bother, I work on this, but I'm not going to talk about it. We get all this risk information, which we're not equipped to handle. And we don't get training. Our educational system is way behind the epidemiological revolution. It's not teaching you how to think about risks and benefits for anything. Food, particularly. Okay, so we ended up then with a surplus of food and an image for women of thinness, a desirability of thinness in the West, particularly in the United States. Here's data from 6 college campuses all over the country of ours, 2 undergraduates that this has been. We said, I am concerned about being overweight. Percent responding often or almost always. 57% of the females, college women. 21% of the mass. My favorite question was, I am embarrassed to buy a chocolate bar in the store. 13.5% of females. They don't want to be seen as indulging themselves or eating one of these forbidden foods. And I thought this was really sad. So I wanted to figure out what to do about it, and what I realized was that France has the same problem we do. They have all this food, they're roughly as wealthy as we are, but they don't seem to have this crazy fear of food that we have. So I ended up studying France. This was with a French sociologist called Fischer, but these are all Penn undergraduates. Amy is now a professor of management at Yale. Okay, so I want to just tell you a few things about France. This is a cultural comparison of developed cultures. 16% of the French are obese, 32% of the Americans are obese. And the French, we all agree, eat well. They eat a higher fat diet than we do, a higher animal fat diet than we do. And they live more. They're tied for fourth in the world, 81, when we're down to 25, 78.2 years. So what's going on here? They're eating a high-fat diet. Well, as you know, high fat is not so bad anymore. I mean, the world has changed. Medical world is, the whole cholesterol thing is down the tubes now. Now it's all sugar. Wait another 10 years, God knows what it'll do. Maybe it'll be broccoli. Okay, so what's going on? So we did surveys. These are surveys, telephone or written, of French and Americans. And they're reasonably representative samples, but probably they don't represent the lower classes in proportion. So here's a question. If you have a choice of going to a hotel for a week, you have a choice at the same price of a luxury hotel with average food or not particularly comfortable hotel with delicious food. What would you take? And let's just look at the women. 13% of the French women will take the luxury hotel, 83% of the American women. Now the American women, first of all, we like luxury more than Europeans. Americans are always shocked when they go to Europe and they see the kitchens and things. How could you cook in there? They don't have all these machines. Because they tend to buy their food daily. But the point here is that the American women are worried about being locked up in a hotel for a week with good food. That's actually something to be concerned about. So the French are much more directly appreciative of food. Each of these is one sample of a whole set of questions. What do you think of when you think of heavy cream? And we give them the choice, whipped or unhealthy. So only 28% of French women think about healthy, 68% of the American women. So here we have a delicious thing. And Americans are thinking, and typically Americans think of food as doing something to their body, and French think of food as something in their mouth that tastes good. Okay? Obviously this is not 100 to 0. Now, all of you think of the first three words. I'm not going to ask you to respond. First three words that come to your mind when you think of chocolate. We have to have this data from India too, but never mind. 4% of the French women mention a fat word, like, we'll say, Nestle, brown, fat, one of the few words. Or they might say calories, we count that as fat word. 27% of the American women take this, one of the greatest food accomplishments of our species, and they're thinking of it as adding to their waistline. It only has to be waistline if you eat a lot of it. Okay, now just a couple more things. Okay, and we asked them, do you eat a healthy diet? The French think they're eating a healthy diet. The Americans think they're not. The French are eating full-fat foods. They're eating what we would call not a terribly healthy diet, and they think it's healthy, and they're healthier. That's the amazing thing. Okay, so then how come this is true? And we then went to look at the French. Here, this is one. This is data just collected. This is the first time I'm showing this slide. We asked them, this is French, this is a representative sample of French Americans and Indians. Now the Indians are people on the internet, so it's 30% of the Indians who are in this sample. If you had to divide all the things you eat and drink into two categories, what would they be? Open-ended. 33% of Americans say healthy, unhealthy. That's how they're gonna divide all the foods. That isn't even a reasonable category. I mean, it's a continuum, right? And actually, 14% of the French did, so that's surprisingly
Are
high.
there any other options there?
This was open-ended. We have another part which has options, which I'm not showing you right now because I'm trying to get through this. But this is more actually open-ended, just when you think about food. So we're thinking of healthy and unhealthy foods. There's no such thing. Why is chocolate an unhealthy food? Why is pizza an unhealthy food? You can live on pizza. Okay. What I thought the right answer was animal origin, plant origin. That's biologically sensible, it's nutritionally meaningful. Only 10% of the French and 5% of the Americans came up with that. They had other things they came up with, which I'm not telling you because I want to get past this. But this is hot off the press. Okay. So we went into we said one thing seemed to us is the French eat less. That's one reason to explain why they're not obese, right? And so we went and looked at, we went to supermarkets, and undergraduates. We went to McDonald's in Paris and Philadelphia, and we ordered the same dishes and we weighed them. We had a little scale. 189 grams for these dishes, 256 in the United States. So when you go into McDonald's and order the same meal, you get less food in Paris. We went to a Chinese restaurant in Paris and we ordered the same 6 dishes. Look at the difference in weight. Everyone knows this who goes to France. They notice that the portions are small. And the fact is that hunger is very little to do with how much we eat. When you've eaten your first few bites of food, you're not hungry anymore. So if you eat a small portion, that's okay. It's culturally appropriate. We finished the culturally appropriate meal. Done. So they eat less. That's a good reason. Now, we said that's only in restaurants. How about when they eat at home? So we went to supermarkets and we got the modal portion. There are different portion sizes at the supermarket. We're talking about individual portion sizes. So we just counted how many they had of different things. So in the yogurt, the individual yogurt in France weighed 125 grams, and in the United States, 227. Theirs has more fat, but a lot less calories. Even the fruit, we took 4 fruits, and we measured the weight of them. Just right off them. Their apricots are smaller, their apples are smaller. And then soda can, typically in France, 330 ml. In the United States, 500 ml. So they have a Coke, they get less calories. And they're happy with it. You'd be happy with it. Okay, so here's an example of the difference in the yogurts. Now, you might say this is because of the metric system. It's nothing to do with French food. It's got to do with, some bigger cultural difference. So we went and measured the weight of other things in the supermarket. So, for example, cat food weighs more in France. And the toilet paper square is bigger even though they eat less. Okay, so, and what's happening now is that the American food industry, because they saw what happened to the cigarette industry, they don't want to be blamed for obesity, so they're now serving smaller than the standard French Cokes. As you must have all seen this in the supermarket, they're becoming the most common form. I think they make as much money on the small one as the big one. And so the trick is to find something where the food industry is working on our side. They're helping us eat less without losing money. That's a great deal, okay? And this is happening in a number of areas, not just sodas. Okay, so, briefly now, one of the big world changes in food is pizza. Pizza is far and away the most popular food in the United States. Nothing's close to it. I think steak is number 2. I don't think you know this, but before World War II, there was almost no pizza in the world. It was a food of Naples. Not even other Italians had much pizza. And look at it now. It's becoming the most popular food in the world. It isn't yet in China and India, but it's going up because it's got great features. It's got texture, it's got the cheese, it's got the cheese texture, it's got good taste. Okay. Now, do you all know what Google Ngram is? Okay, so this is the frequency of words. In this case, in United States, French and Italian books, all the books in the Michigan and Stanford libraries have been scanned. This is the frequency, relative frequency of the word pizza, but virtually 0 in 1900, in 1950, and now, 2000. And look at the frequency of that, and look at it. This is the American frequency. This is the Italian. this is the French. We're way above the Italians. Anyone who explored the world now would say pizza was the native food of the United States, and the Europeans got it from us. Okay? So this is an amazing period. This really involves some study. How the hell did this happen? This enormous change. Since it was the World War II invasion of Italy by Allied soldiers that probably was what did this. They were going up from Sicily up, and they started to eat pizza, but when they got to Naples, but it's not clear how it caught on so well. Okay, this you're not supposed to be able to read this. I always tell people don't show graphs like this, but I just want you to look at the flow on this. Each of these is a frequency in English of each of these words: sushi, tofu, soy sauce, oregano, tortilla. And what you can see is that about in the 1970s, all this stuff starts going up. In the 1970s and 80s, something happened. We had an ethnic food invasion. I don't know why it happened then exactly, but it's fascinating that it did. Okay, so now I want to just quickly say, I've gotten very interested looking at the French, looking at pizza, and culture borrowing. The idea that we have all these cultures in the world which do all these things. Some of them do them better than others on some objective criterion, like cutting down illness or something. And we don't have to invent these things. This is pre-adaptation. We can borrow it. Someone's got it already. We're borrowing French small portion sizes. So the idea is we should be looking around and saying, who has the best postal system? Let's see how they do it. And one of the most interesting places is Singapore, which often has the best of a lot of things because they're very organized and they're very long. They have a very long time horizon. Okay, so all these things are happening in the world, you know this. Okay, so here's my idea. If you were in heaven, the Italians would do love, the Swiss would do the banks, the British would do the universities, and the French would do food, right? But if you were in hell, the Swiss would do love, the Italians would run the banks, the French would do universities, and the British would do food. Now, obviously, one can pick and choose here, and the question is, shouldn't we be looking and saying, what can we borrow? Now, some things you can't borrow from Singapore, for example, because they have secure elected positions, so they can make a decision for 10 years from now, it'll be better for us. We can't do that because our people who make that decision have to be elected in that interval. So that's not going to be easy to import. But some of it, they're leading the world in water reclamation, for example, making drinking water out of sewage water. I've done work on that, I'm not going to tell you. Here's an example of a borrowing of the French. This is the Veteran Foundation here in Philadelphia, has been doing charter school lunches. They've been arranging, and they're doing French-style lunches in inner-city schools. And the kids sit around the table. They sit there for half an hour. That's part of the rules. They get the food is prepared there. It's not prepared coming in, aluminum foil from someplace else. It's good food, and they have no choice. That's characteristic of French cafeteria. They get an appetizer, a main course, and dessert. If you don't want it, don't eat it. And it seems to be working. I've watched some of these classes. So this is an attempt to do an export. It's going to be, and whether it'll work on a large scale, I don't know, but it's a good and interesting start. Okay, now, one or two other quick points, and I'm running out of time, but anyway, okay. One of the things I'm very interested in is that our mind was evolved, of course, most of the evolution occurred pre-agriculture. And we have a lot of things in our mind that are not really appropriate for this crazy world we created in the late 20th, early 21st century. And I've been looking at, there's a whole bunch of things. Some of them are called heuristics and biases about the people who work on decisions. I just want to mention one, but there are many, many of them. And the one I want to mention is the law of similarity, which was originally described by two anthropologists, Fraser and Malls. Fraser in the 19th century, and also Tyler in the early 19th century. And the idea is very simple, the image equals the object. That's a pretty good rule. If you see a tiger, think about it, 20,000 years ago. If you saw a tiger, it was a tiger, right? Do something. But we live in a world of images. The last time you saw a tiger was a picture of a tiger. And so it's not right now to react to images as if they are really the real thing, right? That law doesn't work anymore. with all these images we have. And we demonstrated this with Penn undergraduates when we presented them with a piece of chocolate shaped to look like a dog. They knew it was chocolate. We had a piece of chocolate right next to what we made it from, and 70% of them didn't want, and they like chocolate. They ate a piece of the other one. They didn't want to take a bite. And they said, I know this is stupid, but I feel funny about it. Looks like dog do, is dog do. That's just makes it reasonable and heuristic. Inappropriate in this case. Okay, I want to just cover one or two things. I'm running out of time, of course. I'm just going to tell you very quickly about disgust, because the next thing I want to tell you is about disgust. So let me just say that it's a uniquely human emotion. It's food-based. It's absent until 4 or 5 years of age. And okay. And what the important point I want to make is that almost everything that's disgusting, that's edible, is animal origin. Almost everything. Isn't that interesting? Huh? Okay. Now, I'm not going to bother. If something disgusting touches something else, here's a cockroach and juice, people won't eat it, even if it's a sterilized cockroach. Okay, that's how powerful disgust is. A disgusting object can ruin your favorite food. It becomes a source of humor. Look at this joke. Now, so this is benign masochism again. We've acquired the fact that poop is bad, and now we can play with it and enjoy it as a joke, because we're not really a piece of toilet paper, right? Okay, so I was at the Franklin Institute. They had a big exhibit on grossology, and they had a gut, and this kid scrolled through the gut, came out the anus, and there was this pool of poop there. Everyone was having a wonderful time taking pictures, and they kept coming out. This is benign masochism once again, this emotion. Okay, so the next change, which I want to briefly discuss, is the next change is a sustainability change. Food has become a moral entity. It's not just issues of long-term. The rest, now people are concerned, people meaning some people in the Western world, and maybe the developed parts of the Eastern world, people who have the luxury to worry about these things. They're worrying about the earth and all these sustainability things. And I just want to mention two things very quickly. The GMO opposition is characteristic of the people who are worried about this. GMOs, as far as you know, are totally safe and are part of the solution to the world's sustainability problems, but there's a lot of opposition to them, which we're studying. It's primarily moral opposition. Not that it's harmful, but that it's wrong to do this. There's a belief in the benevolence of nature, which we are studying, that nature is wonderful. Nature is not wonderful. Nature is neither wonderful or terrible. It's both. It's death is natural. Let's start with a big one. Okay? Anyway, and there's a lot of opposition to meat consumption because meat is an inefficient way of using the Earth's resources. Okay, so this is some work we've done. Just let me tell you very quickly that meat intake is growing in the world because most of the world is a developing world and they're getting more money, so they're eating more meat because meat is a favorite food. Okay, so that's Brazil and China that are showing the big rise in that graph. Okay, meat is complete nutrition, unlike any specific vegetable food. It's the most favorite food cross-culturally. It's also the most tabooed food. Both the favorite and the most tabooed. We have vegetarian, we don't have meatitarianism, we have vegetarianism. So meat has good nutrition, good taste, but it involves killing animals. That's been a concern for humans for a long time. We call it the compassionate reason. It is bad for the environment because it uses a lot of resources. To get a pound of food, you need about 8 pounds of corn, depending on a lot of things. There's no simple number there. But okay. And in the developed world, it is believed at this time, though the evidence I don't think is very substantial, that health, it's not good for health. Most people believe that. So it's a factor of considering. And so we have all three of these reasons working together to cut down meat, but it's hard because we love it. So we have this sequence here from omnivore to vegan, and we are studying how people in this country negotiate this. Because every time you limit your meat intake in some way, it's like I won't eat beef, there are always borderline cases you have to worry. You end up reinventing the kosher laws, a version of the kosher laws. So when will I be able to eat meat? So beef. So I don't eat beef. I don't eat a mammal or bird meat, except when it's going to be thrown away. So my partner who eats meat is finished with a half a hamburger. I'll eat the other half if I want to, because that's going into the garbage. And I'll have a whole set of rules. It's like the kosher rules. Okay, anyway, we're looking at how people negotiate this. By the way, there's movement in both directions. There are people who stop being vegetarians, stop being vegans, and so on. Okay, so I just want to say one thing about what's encouraging if you're trying to reduce meat is that we find that about 30% of Americans who are omnivores feel bad about eating meat for one of these reasons. So there's a beginning of a possibility to develop this. Okay, there are only about 5% vegetarians. But is there a lot of people just think, I shouldn't be eating meat for one or three reasons. Okay. Now, so the solutions to this problem: more efficient meat production. That's the bad one in a sense, because that's not going to get rid of the cruelty. Reduction in meat consumption. That's what I've done. Becoming a vegetarian or vegan. Or meat substitutes, and that's a big thing now. Cultured meat, way distant from being practical, but possible. Plant-based meat substitutes, that's happening right now. Nestle, just a few weeks ago, introduced their Awesome Burger, which is a plant-based thing, but they're a big player. So that's sort of interesting. I've had it, it's good. And insects. Insects are animal protein, and they should be good, and we're looking at that. So I want to close with insects. This was work done with Chris Chan, who was an anthropology major at Penn. Insects have high quality protein. They have a great conversion rate, better than any food we have, of plant calories to animal calories, or plant protein to animal protein. They're very easy to farm. They take very little land up. And then people aren't as upset about killing insects. Most of them do it in the summer anyway, as opposed to animals, including fish. And over 1 billion people eat insects daily, regularly, all different kinds. So if we could get them more popular, that would be great. So I just want to say, we don't do it because they're disgusting. People say, insects, right? That's true. But why are insects disgusting? Because they're contaminating. That's like disgusting foods. You put the cockroach in the food, that people don't eat it. That's true. But all animals are disgusting. Almost all. There are 4,000 species of mammals. We eat 3 of them, and we only eat their muscle. I mean, we're basically finding almost all animal foods disgusting. This is that we eat. So the question is, nothing special about insects. We basically find animal foods disgusting, and we made a few exceptions. And by the way, those exceptions are very touchy, because if you see a cow, you're not going to want to eat the meat so much. You know, if you watch a little, you used to be able to go to stockyards and watch the animals. You can't do that anymore, because people do that and they become vegetarians. So it's very delicate that we eat meat. So here's some insects. This is at a restaurant in New York. The big areas for eating insects in the world are Southeast Asia and Mexico. Other places too. A lot of places, but those are probably the 2 most intense areas. This is the Mexican grasshoppers, crickets. Here's one of the world's great restaurants, Noma. It's Copenhagen. It was the greatest restaurant in the world for a while. It's closed now. I've eaten there twice, fortunately, and one of the dishes I had was live ants. I wish I had a video of this, but I don't. That was one of the 27 dishes I had at the meal there. I ate them. They're pretty good. They're not great, but they're pretty good. Okay, so insect acceptance is, we can show it's predicted by not only how disgusting you find insects, but how disgust sensitive you are. How generally disgust sensitive, that's the minus. And the frequency that you consume sushi is a positive predictor of whether you'll accept insects. Because sushi's a little disgusting, it's raw fish, and and it's got a certain amount of excitement about eating it. So that's that. And now I just have to show you this, because this is the other greatest piece of data I ever got in 5 minutes, through Lyle Longar, who's a wonderful computer scientist, linguist, and psychologist. And I said to him, who's eating sushi? He said, I'll tell you. And he sent back to me in 5 minutes the script. So this is age. They have 77,000 people, 75,000 people already signed up. 75,000, they have their emails, their web pages, everything. And you can see how often do they mention the word sushi as a function of age. And here is the sushi curve right here. Peaks at 25 and goes down after that. That took 5 minutes. in this big data world that we're in. Okay, so I'm about to close, don't worry. Sorry. All right, so just let me say, you can get people to eat insects. The real problem is not that we can get them, but they have to be cheap. They're expensive. And the only way to get them cheap is to get Pepsi-Cola or General, one of the big companies to make it, because they can make it cheap. That's what they know how to do. And so the people who are developing insects don't want the big companies to get into it. But in fact, that's the way we're going to get them to the point where people can eat them. So, this is all kinds of things. Oh, and black soldier flies are of particular interest. They have a 6-week cycle. You can generate them quickly, the little larvae. They're perfectly tasty. Not great tasty, but okay. You can make flour out of them. It's like regular flour. But they eat waste. They eat what comes out, what you're throwing out in the refrigerator. They even can live on feces. They make protein out of stuff that we can't eat. So they're a great source, and we are now studying acceptance of black soldier fly. So to close, we have a situation where some new foods come in from the bottom. That is to say, from relatively lower class people, like chili pepper from the Hispanics, insects from all the people around the world who are eating them with a traditional culture. But they also come in from the top. Sushi's coming in from the upper classes. It was wealthy people who ate it. It's still expensive. But insects are also coming in from fancy restaurants. And chocolate came into our culture from the top. It was expensive, but it seeped down to everywhere. So we have two directions to try to trace the origins of food. And I'm going to have to skip. Well, I just want to make one quick point here. This is my last one. The left, which I have many sympathies with, has the left in food has a bunch of principles they're pushing: natural preference, organic food consumption, sustainability. They're anti-technology and they're anti-corporate. This is a package. But these things are not correlated. It's the corporations and the technology that's going to get us to sustainability. So we have to sort of try to break this package. Natural preference has nothing to do with sustainability. If you want to say sustainability is the goal, we have to sort of play down some of this other stuff and make things sustainable. So we want to end up in a world in which when we think about what we're reading, this is the image that comes to mind. Thank you.